Well, we have on the line here Mark Dolfini, author of The Time Wealthy Investor. Well, thanks for joining us, Mark.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just dive right in. Can you kind of give a little background and what your specialization is?
Well, with my moniker, the Landlord Coach, I pretty much get into training sea lions and things like that. So that's pretty much what I do. No, I obviously, I've been in real estate. It's hard to believe I've been doing anything for 20 years now, but I've been, I started in real estate over 20 years ago. And when I got my start, I was going to run out and make $1 million in the next, and that first year. And of course, plans changed, and it fell far short of that. and from after buying my first rental property, I proceeded to make about every single possible mistake a person can make in real estate. So I often, whenever I get a coaching client or someone coming to me somewhat sheepishly saying that they have a problem, I usually can make them feel pretty good pretty quickly, because I can promise you I've made bigger mistakes than they have. So I'm pretty good at that.
Well, we joke that you're either learning or you're earning.
Right. That's very true. I like that.
So before we started the show, we were chatting a little bit about those type of people and investors that you typically help. And you usually work with those that have a couple deals or two under their belt, right?
Yeah, and that's only because, and I'm not trying to be snobbish about it, the only reason for that is because you don't know what you don't know until you start getting into the trenches. Right. And what most of us that's been in that realm, and I had 92 rental units by myself with no support staff, no office staff. And I'm let me just say this, that's not what you want to do. You do not want that. I promise you do not want that. I mean, even though I had $65,000 a month coming in revenues, my life, not only was my balance sheet over leveraged, my life and my time was completely over leveraged. And being bankrupt in time is way worse than being bankrupt in anything else. Mm-hmm. So, and when you are suffering from time famine, it is just brutal to get out of that. So from that aspect, I generally work with people who have a couple deals. I mean, if they got 5 to 10, you're starting to feel the problems, especially if you're self-managing. But even if you're turning it over to a property manager, and a lot of people think that that's the panacea, until you realize that there's a lot of property managers that have the same capacity problems as you do. It's just that you've just delegated to someone else, and you're really not, all you're doing is kicking the can down the road and making it more expensive for yourself. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't, I'm not saying you should self-manage. I'm not saying that you shouldn't self-manage. It's just understanding the infrastructure that goes into managing properties effectively. And if you can do that, then you're going to be, your life is going to be so much better.
I'd like to take a step back and kind of think back to when you had your goals of, building all the wealth initially. What drew you to real estate initially? Why did you think that was the pathway to freedom that you were choosing?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I've always been interested in the idea of ownership, and I often kid. I remember my dad as a sitting on his lap with the Sears catalog in terms of picking out a Christmas present, and my dad sitting me up on his lap and okay, well, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, and he opens the catalog, and I said, real estate. He didn't understand why would you even answer that way? Because of course, when you're 8, you want the best tree fort in the neighborhood, so you can, have your friends be the envy, be the envy of the neighborhood of the best tree fort. But kidding aside, that really is where it started, that interest of just ownership and being able to do what I wanted with my land. Of course, that was a bit naive in terms of, an 8-year-old's thinking, but it really wasn't that far off in terms of why I wanted to own it. But when I really got my first start was when I got out of the Marine Corps. I had bought 40 acres of pretty much desert in the Arizona Coconino County. There's a 40 acres of ranch space down there that I just bought that, and I bought it dirt cheap. It was like a couple $100 an acre. So I was just buying it and holding it. But the real first rental properties I bought was when after I got out of the Marine Corps, came to Purdue to go to school, and I bought I bought a couple rental units while I was in school as a student. And by the time I graduated, I had about $500,000 worth of real estate. Is about a dozen rental units by the time I graduated from college. So really the idea was creating a better life for myself. I knew I wanted to work for myself. I knew I wanted to be my own boss. But the problem was I just had a faulty vision. I just wanted more, not knowing what more meant. And that was
passive income wasn't as passive as you expected, huh?
No. And really because of that faulty vision, I never stopped. I mean, I have a good work ethic. My dad taught me good work ethic, and a lot of military guys have good work ethic. And just because you have a good work ethic does not mean you should be the one doing all the work. Mm-hmm. And I never recognized that. And so I just traded my time for money, which is the definition of a job. So, right. So I had another job, and it was the worst paying job in the world. I was never off. And I just kept building my portfolio thinking that more was better. And like I said, I just had a very faulty vision. So,
and you said you were managing your entire portfolio yourself and doing all the showings and taking all the tenant calls. And yeah, that is a pretty brutal existence. And well, you did mention one interesting thing though, because, as owners of a decently sized portfolio ourselves, you do tell people that property management is kind of the silver bullet, right? And it doesn't sound like you agree that that's necessarily the cure-all. So beyond that, or is it just properly managing the property management, or selecting them, or what's the key there to really get that off your plate?
Well, I think it'd be important to take a step back from my perspective to just kind of tell my story a little bit, just
Sure.
so I can give you the framework in terms of why I think the way I think. So at that point in time, when I graduated from college, I had about a dozen rental units or so. And then I went on, I worked for the Marriott for a few years, which is a wonderful company. Was absolutely not the right job for me though. And it was right around the time of 9/11 that happened. And I'm from upstate New York, and that really hit me at the core. I mean, just probably more so than people who lived out of the state. But that day changed a lot for me, because I was sitting at my desk thinking, at a job I wasn't really that plugged into. I mean, I was good at it, but I didn't really like it, making decent money. And I thought, how many of those people went to their job that day for the last time?
Right.
And that wasn't enough for me. So I decided that I was going to leave, and it wasn't maybe 6 or 8 months later that I decided to leave and go out on my own. And at that point I was full time, and I had built up my rental portfolio by the time I left to about 30 units. And it wasn't quite enough to sustain me, but it was okay. It was close. So I got a part-time job, and then I just kept building my portfolio and hodgepodge of wheeling and dealing. And by 2006, 2007, somewhere in there, I had acquired about $6 million worth of real estate altogether, which was 92 rental units.
Nice.
So it would have been had I operated with the mindset of being able to get someone else in to take the lower end work. And that was the problem, was I never had a vision for replacing myself from the low end work, where it was the $10 or $12 an hour work. And my time should have been worth more like $20 or $30 or $40 an hour. And I never exchanged that. I never learned to value my time. So fast forward to 2008, 2009, which I'm pretty sure I felt like the loneliest person in the world when I'm finding out that everybody was going through the same thing. Mm-hmm. I lost about $4.5 million worth of real estate in about 6 months.
Wow.
And that $65,000 of revenue per month went down to about $30,000. And it went month over month over month. And I just couldn't weather that storm. It was absolutely brutal. Mm-hmm. So digging out of that, of course, being a military guy or just saying someone with a good work ethic, not the two are mutually exclusive, but I decided to work harder and work more. So it went to 7 days a week, 20-hour days. And finally my body had enough, and it caught up to me, and I got double pneumonia, and I almost died. I almost died in the hospital. And that set about a path for me to change things truly in my life. And I really need to get intentional about what was I doing this for? Why was I rowing so hard and not really getting anywhere? And so that's when I really came up with this idea, this concept for my business and how I frame businesses now. And this is what I wrote about in the Time Wealthy Investor, is my vision infrastructure process VIP model, which is first you have to have a vision for your future in terms of where you want to go. Because honestly, if you don't have a vision for where you want to go, all you're doing is just making a job for yourself. Because I can promise you, both of you, none of you said, hey, you know what? I've got way too much free time on my hands.
Right.
I'm really sick of seeing my family and friends on the weekend. And you know what? Vacations are way overrated. I want to go and spend time laying on my back, fixing a dishwasher at 2 p.m. on a Sunday, right? Like
Right.
no one says that. And if
Right.
you need to come work for me for far less than I'm willing, then you should be paid. So, but I say that tongue in cheek. I think that's the problem, is that the individual investor, they don't understand that just because they can do it, it's not the highest and best use of their time.
Right.
So, so first of all, we set up that vision. And then secondly is that infrastructure piece. And that's what I was lacking first and foremost, was that infrastructure piece, which infrastructure is it's your website, it's your property management software, it's your accounting software, even things like desks, chairs, and computers. That's all infrastructure. And finally, the last piece that you'd put in place is your process. And your process, if you think of your infrastructure as the tracks, okay, if you will, the train tracks, the process is the train that runs on those tracks.
Right.
And your process is the systems, it's the protocols, it's the rules upon which you'll operate. And that all runs in alignment with your vision for the future.
So it seems like there was some pretty drastic things that caused you to make this shift. But there's always a reason why people are driven to teach others these type of processes and these thoughts. What's driven you to share these ideas and thoughts to everybody?
Right. And I'm going to wrap that into your question earlier, Josh, in terms about the property management thing. You know, there's a lot of pain out there. There's a tremendous amount of pain. And, you know, I had to go back and I had to get very basic with myself. I do have a property management company which runs with very little interference from me. In fact, when I do interfere, everybody at the office is pissed at me and saying, hey, sign these checks and don't touch anything on the way out. But I am very much drawn to teach and to contribute to others. And that fills me. I mean, that's really, truly, I volunteer a lot for junior achievement. I love to teach. I just enjoy that engagement and that challenge. But from this side, I see there's so many people in pain that they often give up when they're 3 feet from goal. And that's really, it troubles me in many ways, because people just don't realize with a few tweaks, you could have the life you want. And it's really not that complex. I'm going to give you the reason why I know there's a lot of property managers out there that are struggling is because I work with a lot of them. Mm-hmm. And they all have the same problem. And the problem is when the first indication that there's a problem with infrastructure is in the communication. They say, oh, they don't communicate. They just don't communicate well. And that's not the problem. The communication is not the problem. It's a symptom of broken infrastructure or weak process. That's the problem, right? When we drop the ball as a property manager, it almost is always something that's outside of our scope. I mean, we're going to mess up. I promise you we mess up. There's just too many balls in the air sometimes. But when we mess up, it's almost always because it's something that's outside of our scope from what we do well, right? Could you go to McDonald's and get them to make you a lobster sandwich? Possibly, right? You'd have to bring some raw ingredients. But is that something that they would do well? No, because it's not in their core competency. It's not what they do. But to explain it, let me just explain this. When infrastructure is working, it's hard to notice. And that's the problem with infrastructure, because when it's working, it's like, oh, well, things running well. You don't realize that it's working well because
take it for granted.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. I'll give you a quick analogy. Have you ever been to a McDonald's? We'll use this as an example where it's busy. You walk in, and there's 3 or 4 registers that are being occupied by a cashier. Okay, so there are 3 or 4 registers, and you walk up, and you look to your left and right, and people are standing, like the customers are standing back. Some are holding receipts, some are not. Some are just kind of standing there with their arms folded. and you're not really sure who's next, right? And you've done the whole looking at each other going, am I next? Can I go? Are you next? Right? And then at that point, it's up to the customer to decide who's next, right?
Right.
That's broken infrastructure. A very simple thing that can fix that, an infrastructure piece that can fix that, is a rope line, a queue, right? You install well, it can be metal, it can be one of those retractable, ones, whatever, but you put that up. That's infrastructure, and that solves that problem. Then the customers know automatically to go through there, and it's easy. But that's broken infrastructure. Broken process is very similar. And I'm going to give you another quick example. Say you're in that same McDonald's, except this time it's super busy. And you've got three registers open and 3 and 4 people deep at each line, right? And then the assistant manager or somebody thinks you're being helpful and zooms in, and what do? They open up a register, and what do they say? I'll take who's next in line.
Right.
And what happens is the guy at the end of one line walks over and gets in the next line. That's a problem of process, because the process could have easily been, hey, I'm going to open this register, but I need you to go out there and shepherd some of these people in the front over to that line. That way there's not a riot that breaks out in the lobby. That's a process problem. So these little things, and because they're so small or so obvious, but they make a huge impact on the customer experience. And you are delivering now an inconsistent product or service, and that's the problem, is inconsistency.
And when you're speaking in these terms, resident or tenant would be the customer. Is that what you're?
Correct. Yeah. Sorry, I use resident as my client. So whether it's resident or owner as a property manager.
Yeah, just making sure so our listeners understand we're speaking about as a landlord or property manager, how you're presenting your product, which is your rental, to your tenant or resident. So
right.
Great.
Yep.
So what do you think is the single biggest mistake that people are making as far as how they're presenting their properties or managing them, whether it's self-managed or through a property management company, that they need to look at in order to make the biggest change?
The biggest change they need to look at is their vision. Almost always they have a nonsensical vision. And I know that sounds a little bit hokey and maybe airy-fairy, but it is truly the biggest problem that I run into, because almost always I will be at some RIA meeting somewhere, or I will be out and about, and they see my card and they say, oh, well, yeah, I've got some rentals. I said, oh, what how's that working out for you? I'm like, oh, we've got 10. And I'm saying, oh, what are you trying to get to? And they say, we're really trying to get to 30. And I'm sitting here thinking about it. I say, okay. And I always ask them a very similar question. It's like, you have 30, why not 31?
Right.
And they don't have an answer, because 30 is a nonsense number. It really is. And it's not about the number of units. And I've had this conversation round and round. Well, I got to get to 30 so I can quit my job and this and that. So you don't need 30 to quit your job. I said, you could have 10 deleveraged property that are generating the same amount of revenue, and it's going to get you the same place.
It's really a passive income question.
Exactly. Why are you wanting to create more work for yourself? When you create a job for yourself. So a lot of times I get it. Trust me, this is taken a lot of years of unprogramming on my side. But if you could have 20 rental units ish, whatever, or let's just take that number off the table and say, what about $25,000 a month in free cash flow? I don't think there's many listeners out there that would say, no, that's not enough. Right? I can live pretty good on that. And I don't get too hung up on the number. Most people can live pretty well on that. And I don't get too hung up on that, because I don't want people thinking that it's about a number, but it's really about vision. And if I can share real quick, when I started working with there was a woman that I started working with, and she came to me, she wanted to get 15 rental units or something. I don't even remember the number. I think that was the number she came to me with. And I challenged her, and we worked together for quite a while. And eventually she came up with a really rock solid vision for her future, which was just amazing. And I'll share that with you right now. She said, okay, fine. And I don't get the exact number, but I'll just paraphrase here a little bit. She wanted $22,000 a month in free cash flow. She wanted to move her mother within a 10-minute drive of their home. Okay. She wanted to homeschool her children. She wanted to be debt-free, and she wanted to have another child with her husband by November 2019. Mic drop. Are you kidding me? Like, that was super clear. Now, that did not come out right away. We had to work up to that. But she had such a clear vision for her future. All she had to do was build the bricks and mortar underneath it. It was her castle in the sky. So when I talk about vision, I'm not saying this to be flip. I'm saying it because this is a reality. We only get so many spins on this rock. It's not about 40 rental units. It's your perception of what you think the freedom that you think 40 rental units will buy you. And you don't, I'm okay with it. Listen, if you want 40 and it's going to take that because you've already thought through the cash flow, I respect that. But most people don't think that far through. They're just thinking of a number. Right.
Makes tons of sense. And then, design the life you're looking for and then work backwards to re-engineer that, basically, is what you're saying.
Yep, that's exactly right. It's really about life output. And I really don't want people, now, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of things I can tell you in terms of what they're doing wrong in their business, but it almost always starts with vision. And here's the reason why I start with vision. Because if your vision for the future is to say, spend 2 months on the beach in Florida, 2 months out of the year, that's great. But if your infrastructure is set up for you to return emails and phone calls in a timely manner, your experience on the beach is going to suck. Because that's not fun, where you're having to return emails and phone calls while you're sitting on the beach. That's not going to be fun.
You don't have tan lines on your lap where the laptop is sitting.
Exactly. Exactly right. That's exactly right.
Awesome. So tell us a little bit about how, if people, people that own rentals out there are hearing this and they really want to capitalize on your experience and the training that you provide, what's the best way for people to reach out or take advantage of these training materials? Do you do live events, or do you
admittedly, I've been doing this for a little over a year now. I incorporated Landlord Coach, and I wrote The Time Wealthy Investor, not really knowing what I was going to do with all this. So it's kind of blown up way more than I had anticipated, just because I'm realizing there's a lot of people reaching out to me because there's so much pain. But I'd love to hear your stories, even if you don't, I'm not the one size fits all coach for people. I really want to make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you and for me. I want to make sure that I'm bringing good value to people. So I do group coaching. I do seminars, but really the best way to just get engaged and just see how I work. I got a specific website for your listeners to come to. It's landlordcoach.com/rookies. And just come there. You can download my latest book for free. It's called The Judge. And if you are someone who is working a job and have some rentals on the side, this is a book that you'll definitely plug into. So,
awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, great. We'll definitely check that out.
We really appreciate you joining us here today and sharing all of this information.
It's been a true pleasure. And this really is a passion of mine. I really do want to help people get to a better state of themselves, because I will tell you this, when I'm working with some, whether they're landlords or property managers, there are some really, really good people out there. And maybe they don't always act the best because they get frustrated, but almost all of them that I have spoken with, I'd say, if you had your ideal life, what would you do? And almost all of them, with rare exception, say something that is completely and totally selfish. Almost always they talk about giving back, whether it's through ministry or through, whatever that is for them. And I'm not saying that one thing is better than another, but that's the life. Because when you are running your life well, everybody else gets to succeed. And that's why this is I just feel a calling for me, and I know I'm heading in the right path. But so I really appreciate you guys taking the time and investing in me to bring this to your listeners. I really do appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mark.
My pleasure. Thanks again.